Welcome to Back Pass with Ras Euro special. And in this week, we're going to be discussing a team that is very, very, very special to many people in Singapore and Malaysia, especially. If you're talking about Southeast Asian countries, I cannot talk about the rest of Southeast Asia. But I know for sure in Singapore and in Malaysia, this team that we're going to speak about today is extremely popular. It's none other than England, the Three Lions. And on the show today, to speak about the Three Lions, we've got an Englishman, award-winning podcaster, and you can show the trophy later, and also a renowned author, Mr. Neil Humphreys. How are you doing, Neil?
Hello, thank you, my friends, and hello to everybody. And just for you, look, I wore my special Euro 2016 shirt. I was there in France. There you
Not the
go.
best of memories for England in that one.
It was hilarious. Okay, I know we're not really talking about 2016, but I'll briefly say I wasn't at the famous England-Iceland game. I was covering a game in the Stade de France in Paris. I can't remember who. It was France and somebody. I can't remember. But I just remember being in the press box area, the press center inside the stadium with hundreds of journalists across Europe watching this debacle play out. And we just couldn't believe it. I mean, Harry Kane taking corners and Iceland. And it was honestly one of the funniest things I have ever seen. It was hilarious.
By the way, Neil, show us the award.
Which award? Oh, the thing. Hang on.
Yeah, this is the award that he won.
Thanks to your good self, yes, and all of the wonderful guests who came onto our show on the Yahoo Footballing Weekly show that I co-hosted with Chia Hung Kyong, and had many wonderful guests, including your good self, which allowed us to win a global award for diverse voices. It was great, and we'll be back. So thank you.
Yeah, nice, very nice. All right, Neil.
Yes.
We're going to talk about a very special team here. So before we get into the Euros, let's talk about when you came to Singapore and you found out that England is actually a country that is well supported here. What was your first reaction? Was it do you feel honored that England was so widely supported, or were you bemused?
That's a very interesting question, because I've never thought about it until now. Because I was so Mr. Local, I lived in Toa Payoh then, as you know, and the first thing I did, which I would do in any place, was find the local game. So I wasn't that interested in English football, believe it or not. And people may be shocked, but back then it wasn't live. I arrived in 1996, so all you got was once a week highlights on Premier 12, the old Premier 12, which is MediaCorp, now gone. So I was actually more interested in Balestier, which was my local team, then called Balestier Central. So I was all caught up in the S League. In fact, people don't believe this, but the World Cup 98, which was my first World Cup in Singapore, I barely watched it.
Okay.
Because Singapore wasn't in it. And I was so caught up in following S League and local football that I wasn't that bothered. So looking back, I suppose I was more interested or took notice of the fact that it was more Manchester United, Liverpool jerseys. You didn't really see many England jerseys. And to be fair, you don't see that many now, do you really?
Yeah.
Maybe during a tournament. And even then, I would say most of that is expat, international. I know there was a lot of interest, don't get me wrong, you're right, but it wasn't as common as it was for the English Premier League.
Okay. And one other thing, correct me if I'm wrong, but in England itself, England isn't really supported by every aspect of the society there. There are certain aspects of the society that are a bit afraid to support England, or maybe feel, what's the right word? Maybe a bit distance from England because of the elements that attached to supporting England that go to the games. Is that right?
It's very perceptive. It's 100% right. Even myself, I've said this many times, and people think I'm just trying to, curry favor with Singaporeans. If Singapore played England in any football event, I would want Singapore 100%. And it's not as uncommon as you think. I'm not anti-England, but you are absolutely right. I do get frustrated with the circus around England. It is annoying. I mean, I remember covering, we'll get to the Euros, I know, but I remember covering Euro 2004 in Portugal. And the England fans, they're just annoying. Not all, and all the caveats and everything. But I remember being in the town square in, I think it was Lille, and you'd have the German fans over there and the Belgian fans and whatever Spanish fans. It's the England fans. They can't just turn up. They have to take over the square. They have to annex the town square. They have to hang the St. George's flags across the memorials and the statues and the water and the fountains, and like it's some sort of imperialistic invasion.
Colonialism.
It's a very post-colonial, annoying thing. As you know, they still sing imperialistic songs about World War II and all that crap. And the rest of the world is just kind of laughing at them. They're like, really? Really? You still want to sing songs about 2 world wars and 1 World Cup? You know how much Germany has won since 1966? You know how much England has won since 1966? Nothing. 0. Move on. So there's an element of that. And yes, you're right. It has declined a bit. But look, you only had to see the Euro final in 2020-21.
Yeah.
They're all snorting cocaine before the game, and they're sticking flares up their backside, and they turned Leicester Square into a dump. They turned Wembley into a dump. Everyone was drunk. Everyone was cocaine out of their eyeballs. And then they stormed the stadium.
Yeah.
And all this stuff we diplomatically forget about because it's not good for the product. English Premier League, English Premier League, English Premier League. But the truth is, you're absolutely right. There's always been a minority element, overly nationalistic, overly... Patriotism is fine, but the line between patriotism, nationalism, racism, it's stepping stones.
Yeah.
There's an element. There's always been an element for me of the England support base that is just annoying. That's it. Can't change it.
All right. Okay. Coming back to this shores here and England's support in this shores.
Yes.
I mean, I feel it'd be interesting if someone did a deep dive into when did this all get started, because I believe it actually started when it was called when the English League was called the First Division. It was way back, probably 70s. Because I have people like my dad, he supports England and he comes from that era. I think he probably started supporting in the 70s.
Yep.
He was probably too young to remember the 66 World Cup, and I think in this part of the world, so you didn't get much coverage anyways. So I think what you had was radio broadcasts. He did mention that to me, radio broadcasts, newspaper clippings of scores from the English League, and that's all he got. No other leagues. So that's why the following began for English football. And then you have people here who, perhaps supported teams that were big back then. Derby County, Wolverhampton Wanderers, Nottingham Forest. There are people here that support those teams, and England has probably been supported since that time. So it predates the Premier League era, and I think this is something interesting to uncover in this part of the world, especially.
100%. You're very perceptive. That's 100% true. There's a couple of things that I've discovered over the years. The first thing is, obviously, Singapore became independent in 1965. England wins the World Cup in 1966. It's relevant because, and I've met people in this situation, Singapore's pioneers, the first batch who went to university after independence, mostly went to the UK.
Yeah.
And they were there. They were there the year England won the World Cup. I've met old Singaporeans, like well-to-do, Tauke types. They're now retired. But those Singaporean pioneering politicians, ministers, business leaders, whatever it is, they have talked to me about seeing Pele in England and Garrincha and, Eusebio of Portugal. So their earliest memories after independence are actually going to England, being some of those first university scholars, going to England, seeing England win the World Cup, and that planted a seed. That's number one. That's the 60s. Then you move into the 70s. And the first show that I'm aware of that Singapore got was a Saturday night highlight show called Super Soccer. And I think Malaysia got something similar. And it was just that. It was a once a week highlights package in black and white early on of the week's first division matches, which is why to this day, and I'm very proud of this, I'll still come across one or two older Malay guys. It's usually Malay guys, and they'll have a West Ham jersey. And that's because West Ham were good when they first got that Super Soccer Saturday show, once a week highlights. So you'll see 60s, 70 plus uncles. You'll see, like you said, you'll see West Ham. They'll all know about, because they'll remember Trevor Brooking and Billy Bonds, and they'll remember Derby County and what Brian Clough did.
United.
Leeds United is huge. Leeds United is huge because of Billy Bremner and Don Revie and all those teams. So that was when it started. And of course, Liverpool. We can't forget Liverpool.
Yeah.
Liverpool were in their pomp then.
Yeah.
So that's when it started. So the 60s with the World Cup, and then the 70s with the first once a week black and white highlight show. And then it just went from there. And then I believe they got the FA Cup final live, as we did. But don't forget, it was the same in England. England did not have live football either. We also only had match of the day once a week and the FA Cup final, even when I was a kid. Live football regularly didn't actually happen until about the late 80s, 1990, when it became regular. So we were quite similar. So yeah, that's how it started, I think. Yeah. And I admire the fact that, I've said this many times about the clubs, that Singapore and Malaysia, they have this wonderful tribalism. In some ways, more tribal than England. I'm Liverpool, my father's Liverpool, my grandson is Liverpool, and I'm Man U. And it becomes almost like a point of principle.
Yes.
And I've got all kinds of, team theories for this. Some of it, I think, is the nature of our education system. Number one. And then you go to an all-boys school, and my school number one, and your school number two, and then you do national service, and rah, 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 rah. And you take that tribalism into your football fandom. They're ACS, and I'm RI. And they're Liverpool, and I'm Manchester United. And they're Liverpool, and they're England, and I'm whatever. And that tribalism feeds over into the football. And I find it fascinating because of the tribalism, there's such tremendous loyalty. No matter how crap England are or Manchester United, it's like, nope, my club, my team, my tribe. That's it. So yeah.
True, correct, very true. And if you talk about the other European nations, I think just briefly talking about them, their support, I can briefly say, let's go Germany. Germany probably came from the winning the World Cup in 1990. That's where their fandom increased, and then the later generations will remember the ones in the mid 2000s when they hosted the World Cup. That generation onwards. Spain, of course, was late 2000s and 2010s. Their fans would come from that era generally. The French would be from the late 90s, and Arsenal fans because of their French contingent.
Yep.
Who else? Italy, yes, the team I support. So Italy, most of us would come from the early 90s when Serie A was strong. And it is generally always based on a few players. One is, if you're from the early 90s, will most likely be Roberto Baggio.
Absolutely.
Late 90s will be Del Piero, and then Totti. And in between, maybe some would be because of Maldini, Baresi. So that's Italy for you.
Yeah.
And so Spain, Portugal would probably be maybe Luis Figo, that era, 2000.
Yeah, Luis Figo, Rui Costa.
Then, of course,
sort of 2000, 2004. Yeah, absolutely. And then Spain, of course, around that period, because La Liga was very strong then with the Galacticos.
Yeah, correct.
100%. Yeah.
So that's in a nutshell. This will be the second last episode of the Euro special, so I feel it's good to just have a holistic
Mm.
view on who supports whom in the Euros in this part of the world. So let's get to the Euros, man, to your memories or grief, maybe even of the Euros from the 90s to the noughties,
More
Uh,
grief, I think, than pleasure. But yeah, go on. Where do you want to start?
Euro 92 then, the first one.
Euro
What
92.
happened then?
Okay. Yeah.
You were favorites to qualify from the group. You
Yep.
failed to qualify.
Yep. That was see, that was Graham Taylor. I have a soft spot for Graham Taylor. May he rest in peace. I've met him. He's a sweet guy. I met him at Wembley in about 2010, I think. And I grew up, so this would have been about 93, 94. He made that infamous documentary, which you can see on YouTube. And to any of your listeners and viewers, please, I beg you, after this, go on YouTube and watch the Graham Taylor documentary. You'll never see anything like it again, because no one will ever do it again after they saw what happened to Graham Taylor, because he was mic'd up, pit side, and he's swearing and he's funny and he's like Mr. Bean, and he says all the wrong things at the wrong time, and he doesn't look very professional and he looks very erratic. He just seems to scream all the time. He just, Carlton, Carlton, in hell. That's all he ever says, right? And it's just hilarious. So do watch it on YouTube. But because of that, I have a soft spot for Graham Taylor, because he was a little bit unlucky. Whatever you may say about his tactical awareness and a bit one-dimensional, he was between two eras. So he came in at the tail end of the Italian 90 team that was already a bit old, with Lineker and Butcher and Shilton and Paul Parker and one or two others. They were coming to the end. And then when he comes in 91, 92, so he comes in 92, Lineker's already on the edge. He's heading off to Japan. He's effectively retired. Shearer, people forget this. Shearer got a huge injury. If Shearer wasn't injured, I have no doubt they would have qualified for the Euros. But it was just a strange team. I mean, I was looking earlier, players like Andy Sinton. People were like, who? Exactly. No disrespect to Andy Sinton and Tony Daly. And I mean, David Platt was a good player, but if you're relying exclusively on David Platt for your goals, you've got problems.
Yeah, no Gascoigne as well in that squad.
Injured,
he was probably injured.
He was, He had that famous injury that he picked up in the final for Tottenham. Then he went to Lazio, and he was never the same player after that. He was in and out, and he picked up a lot of injuries. And they lost famously to who was it they lost against? Yes, because it was Thomas Brolin.
Yes,
I've got two memories of Thomas Brolin. Thomas Brolin scored twice in that famous match against Sweden. And I think this is around the time he was at Parma or before or after. But for about 5 minutes, Thomas Brolin was the flavour of the month. Yeah. And then fast forward a couple of years. Then he goes to Leeds. And I swear, the guy they signed had eaten Thomas Brolin.
It was about 4 years after that. 4 years after that.
Yeah.
2 years after that, he was still doing well in the World Cup in the US.
That's right. It
was about 96 when he went to Leeds.
95, 96. That's right. And I think that was around the time they had Yeboah, who was great. But I think Yeboah was injured a bit, and Thomas Brolin. And I remember it because I think it was 95, 96, around there. And Thomas Brolin had gone on this unbelievably long goal drought. And they were making fun of his weight, and he didn't run and he didn't score. And anybody who knows West Ham, my team, if you've got a player in a goal drought or a manager on a winless streak, just look where West Ham is, because that's when it'll end. It's like everybody knows this. If you want to score a goal, play West Ham. If you want to end a streak, go to West Ham. Sure enough, Thomas Brolin turns up like a beer barrel, scores twice. It's the only time he ever scored 2 goals in English football was against West Ham. And I don't even think he scored after that. And then they rolled him out of Leeds, and I don't know what happened to him. So he scored twice against England and twice against West Ham. And that's all he ever did, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, so that was that Euro 92, the end. Out you went. What's the mood like in the country? Because I know after that, you didn't qualify for the World Cup as well. And I remember Graham Taylor was called the turnip.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
it was a funny thing, because because post 1990, you had this big bump in football
Yeah.
because you had Gazomania, Italia 90, and it was the beginning. It was the end of the beginning, if you like, between the 80s and the Heysel and the Hillsborough and the crappy stadiums. And people forget a lot of the first division games were half empty, concrete terracing, hooligans everywhere. You could go to a football stadium in the 80s, and I did in England, and have weeds, grass growing, like some of the old Malaysia and Singapore stadiums. You could have weeds and grass growing out of the stands. They were that bad. So then Gazomania happens, Italia 90, and you think, this is it. Turning point, Taylor report, all-seater stadiums. This is a new day. And it was for the English Premier League, 92, 93, but the English national team was still in that transitional period between the old and the new. And it was only when the EPL really kicked on, 94, 95, 96, that it started to spill over into the England team, which, of course, we'll get to with Euro 96. But poor Graham Taylor, he was in that transitional period where you've still got players like Andy Sinton, and then like Paul Ince was getting a bit older, and David Platt was getting older, and Tony Adams was getting older. And it was a transitional squad. It's post-Italia 90, but it's pre-class of 92. So there was still a bit of a hangover to the old England, the old hooligan England, depressing England, crappy stadiums England. And that didn't really change until Euro 96, when it just exploded. When you move on to 96, it's a whole different ballgame. And it was great for me personally, because 96, I just graduated from University of Manchester. I had my first job at the stockbrokers in London, which I absolutely hated, but it paid quite well. But I hated the job, but it paid quite well. I already knew I was going to Singapore. I was saving up money to come to Singapore to stay with my Singaporean friend. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew it was coming. So it was an exciting time. And then Euro 96 happens. You get the song, you get the fantastic song, Three Lions, which I absolutely adored at the time. My daughter loves it. My daughter absolutely. I'm a little bit, because even though I know that the song is ironic, because if you listen to the lyrics carefully, it's about failure. It's about, we always lose, but we don't give up hope. However, coming back to your earlier point, there is a little minority who believes in the whole, it's coming home, it's coming, like it's England's game, it's England's sport, imperialistic mindset. I hate that. So that's the only negative with the song. For me, the best World Cup song is still World in Motion. I love that. The New Order song from 1990, but I digress.
Okay.
You had a great song, great summer, and it was the summer of Britpop. It was brilliant. Oasis was everywhere, Blur was everywhere. So you had the soundtrack, you had the music,
Spice Girls as well.
Yes, you had the weather, you had the Britpop. It felt like, not to get too deep, but it felt like the last great hurrah of the working class culture, of which I'm a proud member of, in Britain.
It felt like the 60s, wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely it did. In the arts, in sport, in music, in football, in politics. Labour Party were about to win a left-wing-ish government. It just felt like a whole new day. And then Euro 96 happens, and it's in England. It's in England. First tournament they'd hosted since 66. And the team's good. So, and Terry Venables, who comes from my hometown, who I've met, we grew up, I mean, different generations, but we grew up 5 minutes walk apart in Dagenham, and which is where Sir Alf Ramsey is from. It's where Tony Adams is from. It's where Terry. My hometown has more England captains than anywhere else in England.
Okay.
A little side note. So Terry Venables, great football, forward thinking, Christmas tree formation, you know, the classic 4-1-1, 4-2-1-1, whatever it was. And it was a good team. I mean, I was looking at the lineup today. I think you could argue, and younger generations will disagree, but as a complete football team, I think the 96 team was the best I've seen. As a complete football team. And I know what people are going to say. Oh, Gareth Southgate, attack, and all that. But in terms of a blend between youth, experience, speed, creativity. So you start with a defence. Seaman, absolutely rock solid. Gary Neville, Everybody jokes about Gary Neville, but he was a fine fullback, very fast. Centre backs, Adams' experience, Southgate's youth. Perfect. Stuart Pearce, what a story. Misses the World
Oh,
Cup, misses the penalty in 1990,
yeah.
scores a penalty against Spain. Brilliant redemption. Midfield, Anderton. People forget Anderton was fantastic that year for Tottenham. Really fast. A classic old school winger that you don't really get anymore. McManaman on the other side. Ince getting a bit old, but still very strong, still very muscular, very
Yeah.
reliable. Gascoigne had a little renaissance. And then up front, Shearer and Sheringham. That's almost a team without weakness. And the best part was he let them play. He let them play for the first time. England just played with the handbrake off, which Southgate doesn't do, by the way, which we can talk
Yes.
about later. He just doesn't do it. But Venables just said, play. I've got Sheringham, I've got Shearer, I've got Anderton, I've got McManaman. Attack, 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 attack. And if it breaks down, I've got Adams, and I've got Ince and so on. And it was brilliant. And the funny part is, Raz, the most famous game that everybody remembers, the one against Holland, Netherlands, 4-1,
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
probably one of the best England performances of all time. I didn't bloody see
Oh,
because
damn.
my wife, who's in the next room, who was then my girlfriend, she had just graduated and she was taking part-time temping nanny jobs.
Okay.
She's now a teacher. So I spent the entire match walking around these really atas houses of West
Yeah.
London as she went from one interview from another with one bloody annoying rich family to another annoying rich family to be a nanny for their spoilt brat kids, right? So it was actually Fulham, like where Fulham is. That's really
Okay.
posh, like Craven
Mm.
Cottage area
Mm.
is really posh. So I'm literally chaperoning her while the match is on, beautiful sunshine, and she's inside doing the interview with this rich family, and I can hear the whole street cheer, and I go, "Oh, it must be 1-0."
Yeah.
And then I hear the whole street cheer again. I was like, "Oh, it must be 2-0." And then I hear it 4 times, and I think that can't be right. Maybe if someone's got sent off, maybe there's
Right.
a Gascoigne's come on or something's happened. They can't have scored 4 goals against Holland. They can't. And this was a great Holland team.
Yeah.
This was
Yeah.
the Holland team with Bergkamp. They can't have scored 4, and they had. So the best England performance of all time, I never saw. I've seen it since. I've
And,
seen it.
and in those days, you couldn't even watch it on your phone because you didn't have any
Didn't have
headphones and
phones.
all.
Didn't have
Yeah.
phones. I mean, it was live. Of course, it was
Yeah.
live. But yeah, didn't have. But a great team, great manager. For me, that's probably my favourite tournament
Mm.
because it was a peaceful tournament. It was the first tournament, no
Yeah. True.
hooliganism.
Yeah.
As I said, the Britpop thing was happening. There felt like a new renaissance. It felt like New Britain, cool Britannica. It was cool. I'll tell you what it was, Raz. For the first time in years, it was cool to like football again.
Mm.
Families were going to games. It just
Mm.
wasn't working class racist thugs. Families were going to the games. It was a different audience, a different feel. It was great. It was just great, and they should have won. It's an
Yeah.
absolute travesty that they didn't win that tournament. And Shearer makes a very good point. We all love Gascoigne. Gascoigne's great. I think he's a legend. But famously, in that semi-final against Germany, when
Mm.
Shearer scored, they went ahead. They went 1-0 up, and then it was 1-1. And then, if you remember, right at the end, I think it's Shearer. He squares the ball for Gascoigne.
Oh yes, he slid in. Yeah.
Yes, and Gascoigne is like a stud away, and everyone says so unlucky, so unlucky. But Shearer has subsequently said Gascoigne wasn't super fit. He was still Gascoigne. And you just think if you'd have just trained that little bit harder, if you'd have just been that little bit more disciplined, we'd be sitting here now talking about them as champions. Because if he'd have scored that, that's it. They would have won the final easy. That's the
Yeah.
difference. That's the fine margins.
Margins indeed. And going back to that Holland game, I remember the Dutch team had the Champions League winning Ajax players in there.
Yeah,
We spoke about the Dutch with Belstic Alsace coach Peter de Roo, and he mentioned all sorts of issues the Dutch had in
right.
that tournament, and then that game was certainly something else because I didn't expect England to thrash Holland 4-1 at all. And then Italy got knocked out quite early in the tournament in the group stage. So thereafter, I had a bit of a soft spot for England. So I was willing them on to win. I
Yeah.
have to also bring you to this point. England finally won a shootout in that tournament. How's that like?
Well, that's a good story because that was against Spain, right? And it was
Yeah.
0-0. And you won't believe this. I was at a wedding of all the days to book a wedding because what had happened was, and I remember the groom being absolutely furious because when he booked the wedding, like way, way before,
Mm.
he said, "There's no way England's going to qualify, so it'll be over. You know, they'll be knocked
Okay.
out." Anyway, so they get there, England, Spain, and we're in the church, and someone at the back of the church has got a little mini TV. You used to get those little mini
Okay.
TVs with an aerial, like the aerial was
Yes.
like that
Yes.
long, and the TV was that big, right? And so there's all these guys, all these angmos, crowded around on the benches of a church, and you can see the bride's family getting really annoyed. Luckily, it was 0-0 because if there was a goal, they would have blown the roof off the church, right? So by the time it goes extra time and penalties, we're now the wedding's over. We're having the party, the garden party.
Yeah.
But nobody's like the bride and the groom. They're having their first dance. Nobody's watching. They're cutting the cake. Nobody's watching. They're opening gifts. Nobody's watching. We're all crowded around this one guy who's got a TV, and I'll never forget it because we're all watching it, and then Stuart Pearce walks up and we're like, no, no, because we just remembered poor night, Italia 90. And Stuart Pearce is such a great guy. And he's so, heart on the sleeve, emotional.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we'd rather he didn't take the penalty at all
Mm.
than take it and not miss again, not twice in two tournaments. That's heartbreaking. And he buries it. And honestly, if you remember it, the fist pump, the
Yeah.
roar,
Yeah.
that was something else. That wasn't just a goal celebration.
It was
That
a
was something
relief.
deep from within. That was primeval. That was
Mm.
visceral. It was, and the whole nation was with him. And the church, the wedding party, they just exploded. I mean, beer glasses went up in the air, plates went up in the air, kids were thrown into the air. That was brilliant. That was brilliant. That was probably the second best highlight of the tournament after Holland. It was Stuart Pearce's penalty. Magnificent.
And when you got to the penalties against Germany, was that dread?
Not really, because if you got to put yourself in the mindset of 96. They'd only lost one penalty shootout then. It was famous, 1990. It's not like fast forward when they were always losing them at every tournament. So it's okay, they've lost one, but they are clearly a better team than Germany. I mean, I think their penalty takers were Shearer and Gascoigne and Pearce. You don't expect these to miss. And to be fair, they scored most of them, didn't they?
Yeah,
If I
they
remember
did.
correctly. I think it went
Yeah.
to the sixth penalty, right?
Yeah.
And famously, so it's alleged, I have tremendous respect for Gareth Southgate because the story goes, and some players have confirmed this, but no one's gone on the record because they don't want to shame anybody. A certain player was meant to take it and didn't. The
Oh.
theory goes it was Paul Ince. Was Paul Ince playing in that game? I think he was, right?
Yeah, he was. He was.
I think, but I can't be quoted. I mean, you can Google it, but I think people. But anyway, it was a midfield, outfield, attacking player that just said no, just went hiding. So Gareth Southgate stepped up. He had never, if I'm correct, he'd never taken a penalty in his life, but he just felt it's my responsibility. I'm doing it for my country. So I've got nothing but respect for Southgate because yes, he missed, but he was a centre back. It wasn't his job. He wasn't supposed to take it. Apparently, somebody else went hiding, so he stepped up. So no issue with me on that one. It was just bad luck. Yeah,
Yeah. 5 penalties scored each, and then that was the sudden death that
yeah, that's right.
unfortunately Southgate missed, and that ended England's run at Euro 96. A bit anticlimactic, but it is what it is.
And I think
But I would have loved
same
England
thing.
to have won that tournament for sure.
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Italia 90, they would have won the tournament. They would have beaten Argentina, no problem. 96, they would have won that tournament, no problem. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's England. It's what England do. It's like Gary Lineker says, football's a simple game. 11 players kick a ball around and the Germans always win. And that's it. And England always miss a penalty shootout. Nothing changes.
All right, moving on 4 years later to the World Cup the Euros in Holland, Belgium. You had an exciting first game, took a 2-0 lead against a team that would eventually go on all the way to the semi-finals. They had their own golden generation as well, the Portuguese.
Yeah.
You lost that game 3-2. In between, you had a game where you actually beat actually beat Germany.
Yeah.
But overall, I think a very poor tournament for England.
Exactly that. In fact, when we were deciding to talk about this, it struck me that I had no memories of Euro 2000. None. I had to go back and check. I can remember 94, World Cup. I can remember 92. I can remember 90. I can remember 86. I can even remember 88. But I have no memories of 2000, which makes no sense because I was working. It was my job then. I was working on the sports desk of the Straits Times. And I can remember watching games in the Straits Times office. I can remember watching France vividly, that great team with Henry and Vieira, but I cannot remember England at all. And this is why, because when I read up on their results, it was that thing again. It was the same situation that Graham Taylor had in 92-3-4 that Kevin Keegan had in 2000, which is he had this transitional team. The aging guys from 96, they were pretty much done by then. I mean, he still had Adams, he still had Shearer, he still had Paul Ince. These were guys who made their debuts in the 1980s when Michael Owen was a toddler. So it was, you know what I mean? It was quite, you had some of the class of 92, yes, but you had 2, 3, 4 of the old guard who had one foot in retirement. So it's a transitional side. Once you get to 2004, then it's peaking. You've got all of the class of 92 and so on. So he's got this transitional team, and it's a very strange side because he's got the likes of Dennis Wise.
I remember.
And Nick Barmby, good players. Dennis Wise was actually an underrated player. He was. But I'm not sure if he was Luis Figo level or Rui Costa level. So when you look at Rui Costa's, that team, that Portuguese team with Rui Costa, I think Postiga was playing, if I'm not wrong.
No.
He came later, didn't he?
Nuno Gomes.
Gomez. That's right. And obviously Figo. England had nobody like Figo. Nobody. Not then. You had Scholes. Yes, he was coming through, but he hadn't peaked yet.
Yeah.
And the guys who might have been him, the Gascoignes, players like that, they're too old by now. They're gone. So there's no one of the caliber of Luis Figo. You haven't quite got the thing that comes in 2002 and 4, which is the whole Lampard, Gerrard, Scholes thing. That wasn't really a thing yet in 2000. So that's why I have few memories. It was a transitional squad. Too many of the old guard and not enough of the golden generation. And number 2, Kevin Keegan, bless his cotton socks, great motivator, great inspirational guy, apparently one of the best man managers. I've spoken to many players who played for him. They love him. But as a tactician,
not really.
Yeah, maybe not. And I don't want to speak because he just seems the nicest guy. But yeah, just possibly the wrong manager and a transitional squad when you've got too many other teams, France, Portugal, Spain a little bit later. They're just starting to reach a different level.
Yeah. So that England team, I think in that Euros, probably the highlight was beating Germany, but Germany were also poor in that tournament. And the Romanians, they beat you in 2 tournaments consecutively, knocked you out. Wasn't detrimental in 98, but it was detrimental here in Euro 2000.
Oh, and if you look at that game, they should have won. England should have won. But again, it's such a mismatched lineup. I mean, I was looking earlier. They had the Nevilles as fullbacks. They didn't really even do that at Manchester United, but it just smacks of a little bit of desperation. And poor Phil Neville, he does give away penalties in some really terrible games. He's just so unlucky in that one. He did in that game as well. And I just felt that it's a bit of a mismatch. It's a lopsided lineup. It doesn't have the balance of 96 or 2004 and not really the right manager for that period.
Mm.
Yeah, it was just one of those things, really. Not a great team. Not a great team.
Okay. Now going on to 4 years after in Portugal now, the one you attended. Yes, there you go.
I was
Uh,
there.
nice.
It was the
And
first major tournament that I covered. And there's a funny story to that because I was only going from the quarterfinals onwards, right? Because no budget to cover the whole thing. So I was at Today newspaper then.
mm,
Neil, you're going to follow England, Singapore. Everybody loves England. So you're going to follow England. So we've worked it out. Quarterfinals, they've got Portugal. Once they beat Portugal, they'll be here. If they win that, they'll go here. So those are the stadiums you're going to go to, right? No problem. Here we go. Off to Portugal. Bang. Lisbon. First game. Portugal, England. What a game. England
on
against the
again. Yeah.
hosts and England lose. Because that's what England do. That's what England always do. And so all my travel plans are completely screwed because I'd anticipated England getting to the final and they didn't. Ended up being the worst team in history to win a tournament, Greece,
Yeah.
which was a great story,
Yeah.
but it was an absolute cure for insomnia. And I saw every game. I saw Greece in the quarterfinals. I saw Greece in the semifinals. I saw Greece in the final. And after the final, I blew my brains out because it was just awful. And the fact that the final was against Portugal and the whole nation was there, and you just
Mm,
said Portugal, 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 and they score 1-0 from a set piece.
yeah.
It completely summed
Again.
up the whole tournament. But coming back to England, 2004 was interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it was the birth of Rooney. Two, it was the most exciting tournament debut for an England footballer since Michael Owen in 98 and since
Mm,
Gascoigne in 90. But I would say more than that, because if you remember the opening game against France, I think it was,
yes.
they were terrified of Rooney.
Yes.
The French even have said that. I mean, there's a famous challenge. If it's not Vieira, it's one of their big guys. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Thuram. And he just
Thuram,
shoulders it
yes.
into the stand. And he took that street football from the housing estates of Liverpool and he just took it to the Euros. It was amazing. Every single time Rooney got the ball, A, you thought something was going to happen for England, and B, the opposition just shit themselves. I mean, they
Mm,
just utterly shit themselves. I'd never seen anything like it. He had, he had the physique and the physicality of a bare knuckle boxer, but he had the touch of a ballerina. I mean, it sounds cliched, but there was nothing. Even now, I think kids don't understand. I sound like an old man now. How good Rooney was before his injuries. If he didn't have those injuries, it's the classic England story. And if he didn't play so many games early on, and even now, despite being, top scorer before Kane and top Man U scorer, still doesn't get the
not much
respect.
recognition. Yeah.
That guy in 2004 was a phenomenal. You could argue
Yes.
he's the closest thing that England had to the original phenomenon, the original Ronaldo. He
Ronaldo.
was like that. When the
Yeah.
original Ronaldo broke through at Barcelona, he went, Jesus Christ, this guy's going to score every time he's on the ball. He's
Mm,
big, he's strong, he can beat anybody.
he's
Rooney
fast.
was
Yeah.
exactly the same. I'm not saying he was as good as Ronaldo or as skillful, but in terms of a complete footballer, he had everything. He was magnificent.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. I actually felt watching that, I felt if he had played, England would have gone to the final. Because
Yeah,
I think they would have England would have beaten Portugal and then whoever else that they would face in the semi-finals and then all the way to the final. If he had been fit and not got injured in that game against Portugal, I think England again would have gone to the final, might have won it. This was also the birth of the golden generation, right?
yeah. And I think it was the peak of the golden
Yeah, the
generation
peak as
because
well. Yeah.
I was
And
just looking at their front six. I mean, Scholes, Lampard, Gerrard, Beckham, Owen, Rooney. That's unbeatable.
yeah.
Even today, I mean, we're going to get to 2024, and it's a very different kind of playing style. And I know the
Mm,
whole Lampard, Scholes, Gerrard, who plays where. I put that down to Ericsson. Frankly, if you've got Scholes, Lampard, and Gerrard, you make it work. The Spanish would make it work. The Belgians, the Germans, the Italians, they would make it work. You put
yeah.
Scholes in a false nine role, you put him in a number 10 role, you put him in a playmaker role, you put him in a quarterback role, but you make it work. You don't just, wed yourself to this outdated, archaic 4-4-2 where there must be a left winger and therefore it must be Paul Scholes. You might as well put me and you on the left wing. Paul Scholes is not a winger. He can ping passes, yes, but who to? I mean, that's not the game. That's not the way he plays. You could have done a 4-2-3-1. You could have done anything. So they should have made it work. And the point I was going to make, so Rooney was the key sort of theme out of 2004. But the second one of Euro 2004, it was the birth of the classic great man saviour. Will he be fit in time? Will he make the tournament? Will he? And all of the World Cup or Euro hopes rests on one man's shoulders. And it developed with Rooney at Euro 2004. Then it became the famous metatarsal of Beckham. And then it was Owen. And then it was Rooney again. And then it was someone else. And then there was this period of about 4 to 6 tournaments where we became obsessed with one man's recovery, one man's injury, one man's narrative. And it was a very childish, one-dimensional way of looking at preparations, which, to be fair to Gareth Southgate, they don't do anymore. Yes, if Foden got injured, it would be bad. If Saka got injured, it would be bad. It would not be the end of the world because they're just not set up that way. But we just got so locked into this very cheesy, almost Stamford Raffles, Lee Kuan Yew, one great man, one great leader narrative. Without them, there wouldn't be a Singapore. Without Wayne Rooney, there wouldn't be a tournament. Without
it's like it's a bit like the narrative of like Diego Maradona carrying Argentina, that kind of a narrative, the hero carrying the nation to victory.
Except that Maradona is a far better player than all of them.
Before.
He's a far better player than all of them. And secondly, he didn't really, because, I mean, Argentina was a much better side in 86 than people give them credit for, as we both know. They was not a one-man team. I mean, he was a great player, but he wasn't a one-man team. But yeah, that was the other thing for me. They got caught up too much in this one-man savior paradox that they never shook off for about 4 or 5 tournaments. That all started with Rooney at 2004. And the other thing I was going to say that's often forgotten about, at that tournament, I saw a young Cristiano Ronaldo, and as we know famously, Ashley Cole had him in his pocket. He's one of the few players that never had a problem with Ronaldo at club level. And Ronaldo's too arrogant to admit it, but he's half admitted it, that Ashley Cole never had a bad game against Ronaldo. And coming back to what we were saying earlier about Rooney, Cole, because off the field, he doesn't come across as the most likable chap. And I'm being diplomatic. I think because of that, he's also a bit unfairly maligned. I mean, by far, left back, right back, by far the best fullback I think England's had in my lifetime. And I'm 50.
In that time, yeah, especially he was one of the best in the world. Yeah.
Yes. So that team, you're 100% right.
The only weak point was probably in goal.
Who was in goal? I can't even remember. Was it Seaman?
David James.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yes, David James. See, I couldn't remember. Yes. Which became a trend, which became a theme for subsequent tournaments, because then you had my old guy at West Ham, Rob Green, and then we'll get to Scott Carson a bit later on. So that little period there, post Seaman, and then before that, post Shilton, post Clemens, because the goalkeeping thing was always England's backbone. Right the way back from the 60s. Banks, Shilton, Clements, you can name them all. Chris Woods was an outstanding goalkeeper.
Yes.
Then you go forward a bit more and you get to David Seaman. Always very solid, no issues. But then once you get into the sort of the 21st century, wobbled. You're right, they wobbled. Pickford's okay though. Pickford's okay.
And now, after that, 4 years after, he didn't qualify for Euro 2008. This was the famous Steve McLaren in the umbrella.
Wally with the brolly. Oh, see, this was interesting because what I remember about that was, you could argue he was also going through a slight transitional period. I mean, you can't keep saying that. But what he did do, and this is a classic insecure new manager, new coach thing to do, is because Ericsson had developed that reputation of being caught up in the cult of celebrity, and he was, let's be honest, the World Cup 2006 with the Wags was a shit show. He should have never let them get away with all that behaviour. It was just completely over the top. It was peak. It was peak celebrity. If you look at English football since 1990, 2006 was the absolute peak, and then it kind of leveled off. And today they're much more likable and savvy now. But 2006 was the peak. Everyone was saying Beckham ran the dressing room. You know, the celebrities had taken charge. Ericsson, starry-eyed. So McLaren comes in, right? Complete opposite. Beckham, you're out. You know, gone. Too old, too much celebrity, too much influence. Bye-bye, gone. And they start losing. They start dropping points. So then he has to swallow humble pie, if you remember, and bring Beckham back. And they start winning again. In the qualifying, they start winning again. So that by the time they get to, it was Croatia, wasn't it? They get to Croatia, they only have to draw. At Wembley, they only have to draw. But it's England, so they have to lose, right? It's England, so they have to lose. And he brings them on again in that match, and they improved again when he came on. But it was by then, it was too little, too late. And I was looking at the lineup. In fairness, they were decimated by injuries. Half of the team were out. But you had Scott Carson in goal.
Ah, yes.
Who's still at Manchester City now, hasn't played a game for like 15 years or whatever it is, and still gets 50 grand a week or whatever. Nice work. Nice work. But yeah, Scott Carson in goal. Too many mistakes. I think you had Beckham on the bench. Peter Crouch, I think, was involved. It was just such a weird team. Such a weird, lopsided team.
This was the campaign where the Gary Neville back pass hit a bobble and went over Paul Robinson's feet, right? Yeah.
That was Rob. Was that Rob Green or Scott Carson?
I think it's Paul Robinson.
Robinson, yes. Yeah.
We
had the period of goalkeeper mistakes. So it was a classic case of a new, inexperienced coach overcorrecting what he saw was a mistake, which was this celebrity cult has to stop. Get rid of Beckham, get rid of all the celebrities, get in more compliant players. But they lost their character, they lost their way. And by the time you get to the Wally with the Brolly, it was awful. I mean, he's just standing there. Do something, make a decision, put the Brolly away. In fact, it still resonates to this day because the other week, Rishi Sunak, the British Prime Minister, he announced the upcoming British general election in the pouring rain without an umbrella. He got soaked and they called him Wally without a Brolly. It's like, and that all comes from Steve McLaren. Yeah, terrible.
I want to bring you back to Sven-Göran Eriksson. Would you say that his period as England manager has been unfairly judged? Maybe, I mean, because before him, there's a lot of inconsistency with England's performances at international tournaments. Some they qualified, some they didn't. Sometimes they went all the way, went far, they did well. Some they were performed poorly. But under Eriksson, at least there's some consistency.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to speak ill of the man. He's obviously extremely unwell, and you wish him really well. But yes, he brought back a little bit of self-respect to the England team, and that McLaren interlude was a kind of misstep. But that aside, England qualifying for major tournaments has become the norm. That aside, right? Since Eriksson, and he brought that back. So now it would be absolutely catastrophic if England didn't qualify for a tournament. I mean, it's just routine. It was routine under Southgate. It was routine under Capello. Eriksson brought that back. Before that, people forget, again, my time, 1980s, 90s, it was 50-50. Yeah. If you even got there, never mind if you did well. That's gone. That's down to Eriksson. So he instilled a little bit more tournament nous, positivity. But you can't get away from the fact that it was a great team with a great squad. And the players they had on the bench in that period would have walked into the first 11 in Graham Taylor's days or Kevin Keegan's days because of the depth of squad that they had. So you have to say they underachieved a bit. And look, and get a psychologist, get Ted Lasso, get anybody, but take a penalty properly. Do something. Just, devote every training session to it if you have to. But they didn't fix the penalty thing until Southgate did, mostly. So they never fixed the penalty psychology mental block. They didn't. Other countries did. You look at the Germans. You watch the Germans take penalties. My God, give them 20 penalties. They'll score 18, 19 every time. No problem. They just don't miss. He didn't fix that. He come across as too tactically rigid. A man who was great in his day at club football in sort of in the 90s, but by the time you get to tournament football, it's much more nuanced. It's much more of a chess battle. It's game to game. You can't go in there rigid 4-4-2, 4-4-2.
And
He
that was
didn't.
something that was surprising to me because he managed at the peak of Serie A. And at that time, Serie A is a tactical league. The managers
Yeah,
are
yeah.
changing tactics during the games, and he would be able to adapt. And he got the best out of all his teams that played. He had a great Lazio team that won a lot. And then going to England, not bringing that to the English team, I found that a bit strange because he should be tactically, adaptable to different kind of situations, to the players he has at his disposal. So to be so rigid, that was a bit strange for me.
I agree. I agree completely. I agree completely. But I do feel that, and the players themselves have said this. It's hard to underestimate to younger listeners and viewers how powerful that squad was. This was the real beginnings of player power, where players earned more than managers, where players were bigger than the clubs they played for. Beckham, John Terry. Who's going to tell John Terry what to do? Who's going to tell David Beckham what to do? And so on. And within that, I think there was too much control, too much power within the dressing room, too much celebrity influence, which leads to the next point, what we said earlier, which is we must put everything on Beckham recovering. We must put everything on Owen recovering. We must put everything on Rooney recovering. Where a Pep Guardiola or a Jurgen Klopp would say, okay, this metatarsal may or may not recover. I'm not relying on it. I'm going to start working on alternatives now. And best case scenario, I'll play the guy as a sub or I bring him on, but I'm not risking my entire tournament on this guy's metatarsal. But Ericsson did. You would see him in interviews
Mm.
saying, oh, we're desperately hoping Rooney recovers or Owen recovers or Beckham recovers. You can't do that. Pep Guardiola his season doesn't rise or fall on Kevin De Bruyne or Haaland, nor did with Jurgen Klopp. I mean, he ended up playing his academy kids and still won a trophy. All right, the Carabao Cup, but it was still a trophy, right? I just felt that he was too wedded to his first 11, too wedded to his tactics, which, as you say, was quite surprising for a guy who was so much more malleable
Yeah.
at club football. I just think he got caught up with the cult of celebrity.
Yes,
Uh,
I agree. I agree. So I think he himself felt like he was a celebrity because if you remember correctly, there were stories of him having an affair,
oh yeah,
and he
he
kind of
slept
seemed
with
to
a woman in the FA.
love
Yeah,
being
of
in the
course.
news.
He had a good time, Ericsson. Don't get me wrong. He had a
Yeah,
fantastic time in London. The best.
yeah.
You know.
God bless his soul. That's something he's going to take with him forever.
Oh, he had a
Yeah,
great time. Yeah, he had a great. He was a decent man, a decent manager. And the last point I'll make is that he should have worked harder, celebrity culture aside. He should have worked harder. I know it's a cliche, but they've all said it. He should have worked harder on those cliques. First day, he should have gone in and said, right, Manchester United, stop sitting together. The whole Man U class
yeah,
92, Liverpool, Chelsea, they've all talked about it. They all
yeah,
admitted they did it.
yeah,
Lampard and Terry would sit there and Gerrard and whatever would sit there and, Neville's and Beckham and no good. First thing Southgate did was he stopped all that. He stopped
mm.
all that. And now you've got this wonderful collegiate feel the England teams now, which is why they're so likable, which is great. So, which brings us on
To
to
the
the
upcoming Euros.
yeah. Well, I was just going to say that because then after that, same thing. Fabio Capello, he overcorrected. The English FA overcorrected. They said we look at McLaren and we look at Ericsson. It's too soft. We need discipline. The celebrities have taken charge of the circus, and he went too far the other way. He treated them all like school children, and that completely backfired.
He was
And
over the hill by then. When he
yeah,
went to England, he was over the hills.
and here we are.
Yeah. Now coming to this Euros, one of the favorites to win. I think almost all our guests have mentioned England to be one of the favorites to win, or the
Yeah,
favorite to win,
100%.
or their pick to win the tournament even. So, where do you stand? I think a lot of English, whenever you listen to a lot of podcasts from England, the different pundits are so excited about this tournament, about the players that they have at their disposal, who's going to play, who's going to start. It's exciting times for English football. Where do you stand on it? Is it a false dawn again, or do you think this is it? It's really coming home this time.
No, I agree with everything you've just said objectively. And I am genuinely objective with England because I'm quite whatever with England, right? So I can be honest and truthful. And I'm always that guy, oh, they're never going to win, they're never going to win. This will be the best chance they will have in my lifetime to win a tournament. Now, let's look at the negatives. Yes, the defense. Everybody knows the defense with Maguire and Luke Shaw may not be fully fit in time.
Yeah.
Carl Walker's getting older, and then Stones has had some injuries in the second half of the season. There's never been a team in history, even Brazil 1970, the Dutch of 74, the Argentina 78. You go for all the great teams. There's no such thing as a perfect 11. It's a myth. Even the Spanish teams, great teams, but there's always a slight, maybe it's the keeper, maybe it's the left back. Nobody has a flawless first 11. Nobody. And the French don't. The French have got issues. They've got a terrific defense, but you look at the French attack. I mean, Giroud is still knocking around, and he's 125 years old. So nobody has a flawless lineup. Germany's great, but Tony Cruz is retiring after. He's getting on.
Yeah.
Nobody's flawless. But if you look at the front six, my God, nobody in European football gets close. And I think, all right, we'll just do them quick. So you've got Rice, Bellingham, Foden, Saka, Kane, and I'll even throw in Palmer. Previously it might have been Grealish or whatever, but let's stick with Palmer because he's the informed player. So it was Jamie Carragher. I'm stealing his point because it's a good point. The best player in Spanish football last season was Bellingham. The best player in English football was Foden. The best player in German football was arguably Harry Kane. They all play for England. The three top leagues' best players all play in England. This has never happened before. The second best player in English football was arguably Declan Rice. So it's just a question of how many they score, surely. But then we come back to the good old elephant in the room, Mr. Southgate. If it was Mr. Venables, may he rest in peace, I have no doubts. He'll just say, Matt Busby style. There's the ball, boys. There's the pitch. Go and do what you're good at. All right? Just outscore everybody else. Let's have some fun. Matt Busby style. It's not in his DNA. If he didn't do it in the last World Cup when he could have, he's not going to do it at this one. The key issue, as you know, is central midfield. Does he play that double pivot that he's obsessed with? I can see the logic. I can. Because Maguire, John Stones, I love John Stones. I think John Stones is great, but he's had some injuries and Carl Walker's getting older and so on. I can see the temptation, but you would hope, Raz, he resists it because that front six is so dynamic and so quick and so good at keeping the ball. You would hope the opponents don't have the bloody ball that much. And Rice is 2-in-1. Rice is your classic Pasamalam 2-for-1 special. All right? Declan Rice is a once-in-a-generation defensive midfielder. He can screen like nobody. You haven't got to worry about that. And then you've got this freak beside him, Bellingham, who can get back and forward like Steven Gerrard in his sleep. He doesn't need to play a second defensive pivot in there. And it's great that Phillips has gone nuts at West Ham, Calvin Phillips, because that's one out of the way. And Maynard. So as long as he doesn't have too many defensive midfield options, you take away the temptation, you got a chance. But to me, I don't know what you think. It's all down to Southgate's selections and tactics.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And who would you say would be the underdogs in this tournament, dark horses to win it?
Well, it's funny because it's weird to call them dark horses, but 6 months ago or whatever it was, Germany were a laughing stock, right? It was, and they were making fun. The coach is it's Nagelsmann, isn't it? And they were making fun of him. He's bringing back all the old farts. He's bringing back Tony because they'd retired. People forget Cruz had gone. And was it Muller he brought back or Hummels? I can't remember. But he brought back a few of the old guard, and everyone laughed at him. But Tony Cruz has just won a sixth Champions League and was absolutely sensational, pinging
Yeah.
passes around for fun. I think Germany, if their old guard can get one last hurrah out of them, it's the Germans, man. It's the Germans. I mean, 6 months ago they were a joke, but I'm not saying they're going to win it. But you're talking about dark horses. I wouldn't, with Tony Cruz pinging passes in central midfield, I would not underestimate the Germans. That would be for
And
me.
they've got some good young players coming
They do.
through, like Florian Wirtz from
Yeah.
Leverkusen. So I think they could be, I know, like what you say, Germany, they've always got that pedigree of tournament football, of always rising to the occasion. So certainly a good call.
Well, I mean,
And
international football, they are the Real Madrid of the Champions League. This is not a great Real Madrid side by any stretch. But put them in the Champions League and they flick a switch and it's all over. Dortmund should have been 3-0 up by half time. But it's Real Madrid and it's what Real Madrid do. And this is Germany. And this is what Germany generally do. They would, whatever physical and technical deficiencies they may have, mental weakness will never be one of them. Never.
yeah, certainly. All right, Neil, this has been comprehensive. We've talked a lot about England and covered so many different topics. It's been fun. Thanks a lot for your time to speak to us. And all the best to England.
Yes, they're not going to win.
Well. Let's see. You
They
never
should
know.
win. They should win.
They should win.
I'll be pleasantly surprised. If they win, I'll strip my jersey off and show off my Declan Rice tattoo.
Oh yes, that'd be fun. Yeah, that'd
which
be
I
good.
don't really have. Which
That's a good bet to have, actually.
yeah. Well, I used to say Declan Rice when he was at West Ham, and then he went to Arsenal. So I changed it to Chicken Rice. So
All right.
all right, my friend. Absolute
All right.
pleasure. Thank
It's
you.
been good fun. And for all the listeners and viewers, if you like this, please share it, like us, subscribe to us. And this is me, Ras, signing out, bringing to you one last Euro special after this episode. Ciao.